All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Vijay Avyur, and I welcome you to Aryng's first Data Matters webinar. Our goal with these webinars is to enable startups to be more data driven in their journey to achieve scale, success, and beyond. Through these webinars, we'll delve into specific startup challenges and uncover strategies, tools, and insights that can transform your startup into a data driven powerhouse capable of making informed choices, optimizing operations, and delighting customers. Today's topic is of paramount importance to every startup on its journey to success. Startups are the lifeblood of innovation and progress. Yet, in this dynamic landscape, one challenge persists: acquiring customers efficiently. The cost of attracting and retaining customers can be a formidable hurdle, one that stands in the way of growth and sustainability. In the world of startups where every dollar counts, the ability to optimize your CAC can be the difference between survival and success. So today we gather to explore strategies, tactics, and insights that can empower startups to conquer that startup CAC challenge. In the next hour, we will hear from experts who have successfully navigated the maze of customer acquisition costs in their startup journeys as they share their experiences, hard earned wisdom, and practical advice to help you tackle this complex issue. Our luminous panel comprises of Cathy Tanimura, who is the Vice President of Analytics and Data Science at the growth equity firm Summit Partners. With over 20 years of data and data analytics experience, Cathy has been a key transformation leader in finance, software, and consumer services startups. Our second panelist is Daniel Kjellén, a seasoned marketing leader and currently CMO at StellarFi, with leadership experience at PayPal and Green Dot, to name a few. Daniel is a growth-centric marketing and product management expert and an erudite mentor for startups and growth strategies. Our third panelist is Atta Khan, a growth marketing leader with his most recent role as VP of Growth Marketing for Inside Real Estate. Atta brings over 15 years of marketing experience and expertise and a track record that includes generating over 30 million in ARR and driving 25% year-on-year growth in search engine traffic. Amazing achievements, and it's great to have you all part of this panel. A warm welcome. Whether you're a budding entrepreneur or a seasoned startup leader seeking to fine-tune your customer acquisition strategies, this discussion is your roadmap to success. Together, we will unravel the mysteries of CAC reduction, explore new avenues for growth, and chart a course towards a future where startups not only survive, but thrive in the competitive business landscape. So fasten your seatbelts, open your minds, and prepare to embark on a journey that will equip you with the knowledge and tools needed to help startups reduce their CAC and pave their way for sustainable growth and prosperity. Welcome to the webinar, How to Prevent Death by CAC. So let's get started. My first question is geared towards you, Daniel. In your capacity as marketing leader, what is CAC and why is it a critical metric for startups to monitor and manage?
Yeah, thank you. I guess in its purest definition, CAC is, well, first of all, is customer acquisition cost. And in its purest definition, you can look at it at all the marketing and sales costs that you incur in acquiring customers. So from a formula standpoint, is sales and marketing costs divided by acquired customers. That's your customer acquisition cost. The second part of the question, why it's important to know what your customer acquisition cost is obviously as a part of your unit economics or your LTV formula. So you can always know how much you're acquiring a customer for in relation to how much you're expecting that customer to generate in terms of revenue over the lifetime of that relationship. So, and if you know those two components, you can see how efficient you are in acquiring customers in various channels.
So it's safe to say that it's amongst the most key metrics for a startup when it comes to acquiring customers?
Absolutely. It's a very important metric, and investors will absolutely ask what the CAC metric looks like. And there are many different ways to answer that question, depending on how you as a business are defining CAC. And I would say that that purest definition that I laid out could be used in various scenarios, but in very early stage startups or companies, you can actually define it slightly differently in order to kind of set yourself up for explosive growth and getting more blood into the system, so to say, and learnings. So the definition changes a little bit over time as you're going from very early stage to later stage.
That's great to know. And Cathy, my next question is for you. Daniel mentioned about investors, and from an equity partner perspective, I'd love to know if there's any common misconceptions or myths around CAC that you'd like to debunk or clarify for our audience today.
Sure. I think it's really important for businesses to have a handle on what their CAC is. And as Daniel mentioned, compare that to the lifetime value of customers. I think maybe a misconception is that the lowest is always the best, or that you need to have one single answer, where often it depends on what time horizon you're measuring. It depends on what channels you might be using, and seeing a business that can explain what their CAC is and explain why it might have fluctuated because they were trying out new channels, or they pulled back on some channels that proved to not be profitable, and having a story and really seeing that the marketers can explain what's going on and are thinking deeply about both how they're managing it and how it's fluctuating based on the experimentation that they're doing is often a much better story than simply, here's the CAC, and it's this level or not. So it's often that fuller picture of how does that actually play into the strategy? Are you being intentional about it? Are you being thoughtful in managing it? The reality is that it fluctuates over time, and certainly in the last few years, the landscape has seen a lot of changes, challenges, pricing change, and we really want to see that marketing teams have a handle on that.
Excellent. And my next question is for you, Atta. It's important to understand for startups to really know how customer acquisition ties into their pricing strategy or their revenue model. So according to you, how does CAC contribute in, or how does it tie in into every startup's pricing strategy and revenue model?
Yeah, thank you. It's integral to it. It's integral to understanding sustainability and scalability and how that relates to the pricing strategy. So if you're CAC to CLV, if you are spending more to acquire your customers than the revenue, the lifetime value that they're bringing in, that's something where now you have to understand, is this an area where we can focus on sales and marketing? But at the same time, if you're looking at the competitive landscape and you're pricing your products or services are priced high or priced lower, then you have room to actually bring up the pricing of your services and your products to even out that CAC to CLV. And then conversely, you can also look at it from a scalability standpoint, where if your CAC to CLV is in a good place and you are priced higher than your competitors, then you can actually think about adjusting your price down. And that actually opens up, gives you opportunity to increase volume, revenue and volume, because more of your prospects will then convert into customers, seeing that your pricing is more aggressive there. So CAC is very, very important to understand where you should price your products and services, as that'll mean the difference between scalability, sustainability, or being underwater.
That's a great answer, Atta. And I know you also mentioned lifetime value. I'd love to understand how they play together, but I'm going to come back to that. I actually want to go back to Daniel and really talk about early stage startups. I know Daniel We brought up early stage startups in your first answer. I'd love to hear from you any advice that you may have for early stage startups, any actionable steps for early stage startups who have limited budgets, but yet they're looking to lower their customer acquisitions costs effectively and at the same time scale across their journey. So how would they approach this?
Yeah, no, great question. And yeah, that's what I do, early stage startups and really trying to optimize that part of the journey. Um, uh, and the answer is broad. There's a lot of things that should be done and can be done. But just top of mind, what I'm thinking is don't spread yourself too thin from a channel standpoint. Look at your competitors, see where they are acquiring customers, and specifically in the paid type of category of advertising. Um, Go after a set of core channels where there's high intent from consumers. Paid search is a great example. Affiliate networks is another one. If you're in B2C marketing, business to consumer marketing, it's paid social media, a third one. If you and that's where you can control your acquisition funnel, your acquisition costs, your bidding based on what your LTV looks like and so on. So you have a lot of control of a few channel. Once you start spreading yourself too thin too early, you lose a lot of your control, especially when it comes to pricing. And you need to pour more money into fully testing out all these channels. And it's going to be an uphill battle to actually recover a lot of your testing budget. So my recommendation is always to start narrow and look at competitors and go after that. Second thing I would also focus on is really focus on the funnel. A key to low CAC is high conversion rates. And we know that in the beginning, the funnel is typically not that strong, but the sooner you can actually understand that using the right tools to analyze your traffic, how it's converting each step of the way and turning into paying customers, that's going to be key for your CAC formula. And then let's see here so we had the channel set, we had the funnel, and try to get to a point where you can actually identify as early as possible where you would have a revenue generating customer. In an e-commerce solution or scenario, it's fairly easy because that's when someone is purchasing your product. But in a subscription-based fintech scenario, for example, it's a little bit different, dealing with trials and so on. But the sooner you can actually understand when the customer is converting and turning into a revenue generating customer, the better you're going to be, and the more effective you're going to be in maintaining and managing your CAC.
That's lovely, and I know Daniel, you spoke about and a lot of real life examples. I'd love to hear one of them where you were part of that journey and you helped enable a startup, an early stage startup, get on and get running in terms of reducing CAC and start acquiring customers in a more optimal way.
Yeah, I have many examples, but I can use my latest example with StellarFi, the company that I'm with right now. We are a fintech customer or fintech company going direct to consumer. We have a massive market, about 150 million customers here in the US that need our product. So it's a fairly easy way to acquire in a very large set of channels. In fintech, you have something that is a little bit trickier, and that is fraudsters and fraudsters in general. We can call them that, so you have to keep an eye out for that as well. And you're optimizing not only based on acquisition costs, but also like keeping the risk down and making sure that you're not losing on the back end. My approach has always been go high intent channels first, so paid search, where consumers are actually looking for something that resembles your value proposition. And typically that's a good starting point. Secondly, the other paid social is for me a very good channel because of the broad set of consumers and somewhat high level of data demographics that we can target based on. And then affiliates networks where there's a large set of publishers and you can kind of control your acquisition cost, your payouts essentially. And then as the business is growing and you're improving your conversion rates and so on, that's when you can take the step and go into additional channels that are maybe a little bit riskier from a CAC standpoint, where you're paying for impressions, for example, and you're kind of banking on conversions throughout the funnel. But if you have a mature funnel, you have a good understanding of your customer demographics, and you can target them in a good way, you should be in a much better position to buy that type of media. Now, early stage, you're not in that position. So my recommendation is always to go high intent where you can control the pricing. The second really important component is, in parallel to doing all of this paid media, often very expensive type of marketing, really start working early on your organic efforts. Organic efforts would be anything from search engine optimization, or if you're an app developer or an app product, ASO, the App Store optimization. So your product and brand actually is discoverable in search engines or in the app stores. That's a long-term value proposition. It typically takes 12 to 18 months to really get some traction there. But over the long run, we're looking at it from when we're acquiring customers and looking at CAC. We typically take a very blended approach. So we blend the very low cost or free organic traffic with the paid, and we come up with a diversified blended CAC. And that's what we're managing towards. From a ratio standpoint, after 12 to 18 months, ideally, you should be somewhere in the maybe 60% organic and 40% paid. And paid is really something that you're using to boost your traffic whenever you need to grow at a much faster pace than what the kind of organic channels are producing. A lot of information, a lot to be unpacked here, but these are some of the tactics that we typically deploy in the B2C fintech space.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate you going into the details on that. Very pertinent advice, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of startups will find that very valuable. Cathy, I'm going to switch to you. And one thing, from Daniel's answer here, obviously a lot of behaviors that lead into the calculation of CAC. And it's a big step just for early stage startups to actually also understand CAC and beginning to start calculating it. What advice do you give for startups that are just beginning to measure and track CAC as part of their growth strategy? How do they start looking at it? And what are some things that they are specifically going to start focusing on as part of their journey as they start measuring and calculating that?
Yeah, I think, we try to advise people to start simple and build complexity from there. There's a lot of possible complexity you can put into the CAC calculation. There's a lot of channel-specific data. There's a lot of interactions amongst channels, so you can quickly go down a deep rabbit hole of multi-touch attribution and get really focused on the technology. And being a data practitioner, that's tends to be my first instinct, but often it's a lot of work that maybe is distracting from really understanding what the big picture is. So, start simple with that overall, what are we spending and how many people are we acquiring? And then start to dive into channel by channel. A lot of within channel CAC measurement is useful to understand how a particular channel is trending, even if it doesn't tell you the whole picture of the multi-step journey. The organic pieces are often hard to measure, particularly things like word of mouth. Also, any channels that are offline that don't create that kind of digital footprint can be hard to measure, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not worthwhile. So, take it a chunk at a time, what you can manage with the team that you have, or bring in help to dig into that. Another important piece of the puzzle is to think about what's the actual purchase journey of your customers based on whatever it is you do. It can look really different between a e-commerce purchase that, for example, doesn't require a lot of research. I know I want a new phone and there's 2 or 3 new models and I have to pick amongst them, not maybe such a big deal, versus something that's a longer journey like buying a house or planning a once in a lifetime vacation that you're going to be doing a lot of research in advance. So trying to understand what time horizon you should measure that customer journey over. Is it a day where you can really look at those bottom up funnel channels and pretty much capture most of the picture? Or is it a longer journey where you may need to think about marketing interactions that are happening over days, weeks, months in order to get that conversion, and really being mindful of what does your purchase journey look like, and trying to, again, over time, build the complexity of how you think about your CAC, but start simple and then build from there, and in order to get that better picture, develop the sophistication, build the muscles, and keep working on your program.
Makes sense. But it also seems like there's a lot of jostling that you need to do with data here, right? So, Cathy, as a follow-up, what role does data play here for startups, specifically on their CAC reduction journey? And how can startups leverage data and analytics to measure and improve CAC over time?
Yeah, I think clearly collecting as much data as possible is key to the journey. So between what you're spending on different channels, counting how many customers you're acquiring, trying to do as much attribution as possible, and understanding that customer journey and sort of the timings around it is useful. I think the more data you have, the better off that you are, because the more ways you can slice and dice it. Start with the basics, even if you don't know exactly what you're going to do with the data, often collecting it and developing a history is really helpful, so that when you come back in a few months, a year, you have that track record to look at. It's really tough to start midstream without having any collected data history to work with. So collect it, store it somewhere, make sure you understand what's available through the different channels that you use, and try to bring it together. You can start again with simpler views, but if you have that depth, context, history, you'll be able to do a lot more as you hopefully grow the business, grow the marketing team, grow your data team, and become more sophisticated.
Excellent. That was super helpful, Cathy. Thank you. Atta, so on the topic of data, I wanted to ask you, what specific data points or metrics should startups prioritize, specifically when analyzing CAC-related data? And as they progress on their journey, what key performance indicators should they also start monitoring while they're assessing the success of their CAC, and how or whether CAC's reducing as they go through their journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Cost per metrics are a big one. Obviously, CAC to CLV is kind of your ROI metric, the kind of end all be all. I think there's a particular importance in understanding, one, that same CAC to CLV per channel, per platform, as Cathy and Daniel have alluded here. But I think, when you've got longer sales life cycles, you also want to understand some of those preliminary KPIs as well. So that's where your conversion rates come into play. Let's talk about a lead to win funnel. What do those rates look like for lead to MQL to SAL, SQL? you really want to understand those, as those will give you kind of an initial guidance into what things are going to look like when you do look at your bottom funnel KPI for CAC to CLV. But then you also want to look at the cost per metrics on each stage of that funnel as well. Cost per lead, cost per MQL, cost per SAL. You want to be able to look at all of these things, because when your organization gets to a point where they're looking at revenue targets and goals, they want to use those and then work their way up to how many SQLs will they need, how many SALs would they need, how many leads would they need to hit those targets. And so again, it helps with goal setting. It helps with kind of the preliminary understanding of where you're headed if you've got longer sales life cycles. And, at the end of the day, it helps your individual contributors have a good feel for what they're doing, to get that feedback loop very tight, being able to see every single day, are they pacing right? So some of those metrics, they're going to be your cost per, and some are going to be your conversion rates. One more thing I'll add to this is, again, being able to understand each of those things across your channels, right? Again, it's easy to have it understanding as a whole marketing machine, as a total. But again, drilling into, the individual channels and having a full breakout, that's equally as important as well.
Excellent. And as a follow-up, right? So I know we spoke about early KPIs. You also mentioned customer lifetime value. So just to kind of level set and understand what that means, or how does a startup translate that, right? So what if, say, the CAC is $32 per customer? Is that good? Is it bad? How does it eventually tie back to the CLV, or the customer lifetime value? And how does it then also relate to the other KPIs that you were talking about? And more so for a startup, outside of the lifetime value, the ROI itself. How do they all kind of connect, and how does this really form the big vicious circle that a startup has to manage?
Yeah, CAC by itself, it's an excellent thing to look at, but it's arbitrary without the CLV, right? So your CAC is going to be, as Daniel mentioned, it's the cost to acquire your customer. It's the total cost. It's going to be your headcount. It's going to be how much you're paying for your marketing technology. It's going to be advertising spend. It's going to be the total amount of money that you are spending to acquire your customer. And then the CLV is going to be the total revenue your customer on average will generate for your business. If it's a subscription-based model, on average, what is the monthly revenue generated by one customer? But then on average, how many months are customers signed up with your subscription? If it's e-commerce, then you've got transaction-based, you're looking at averages. But then it becomes arbitrary if you're looking at it by itself. Now, when you put the two together, that's when you have a good understanding of, hey, I'm spending too much money and not generating enough revenue, or, hey, look, we have an opportunity here to scale. And that really, the CAC to CLV, it really is your ROI, right? It's essentially how much are you spending and what kind of return you're getting on your investment there. And then again, being able to drill into those different channels would be key to it as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that really cleared it up in terms of how they relate to each other. That was super useful. Before I go to my next question, I also would like to let the audience know that if you have any questions, we will get to them in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So feel free to post any questions that you may have in the questions tab in the webinar tool. So coming back to you, Daniel, I would love to understand from your experience, would you say that there are any best practices in terms of setting CAC targets and goals for startups at different stages of growth? We spoke about early stage. How about mid-stage startups? How about startups that are also, say, pre-IPO or they're Series E, where they're still looking to grow? They are at a more advanced state right now, but they still are tracking CAC, and they still want to ensure that they keep reducing that or keep an eye on it. Any best practices that come to mind for you, or anything that you want to share from your experience? Any examples?
Yes, yeah. So actually, before I answer that question, I just want to throw out another one that I think it's an important metric when it comes to CAC. That is the payback time, the CAC payback time. Typically, at least in early stage, you might not have all your revenue generating activities or components in your business yet. So you can look at it from a CAC payback time with whatever we have right now, but then you can kind of assume LTV based on what we're planning on from a product standpoint to implement revenue. So looking at those two different dimensions, it helps you manage your business a little bit. So you might actually be running negative right now, but that's okay, knowing that you will actually add additional revenue streams in the future. So that was a side note, but it actually relates a little bit to what we're talking about here when it comes to mid and later stage as well. Obviously, in later stage, the models and the LTV assumptions, they are much more mature, and you can start using your CAC metrics and CAC targets in a I guess much more educated way. To really run your business and put the money put your marketing money where it should be, in a much more efficient way. As I mentioned, I work predominantly with early stage, so anywhere from Series C to Series B, where the more mature and the more profitable scenarios are not as important. But I can imagine, and just going back to businesses that I've been with, such as PayPal, for example, back in the days, we managed business very different than a early stage startup or a Series A startup.
How would you describe the difference in culture and approach?
Well, obviously larger budgets and across the board. We operated in channels that are typically not available for early stage startups. We put more emphasis on brand marketing, and really get the exposure out in the marketplace. And then, of course, partnerships and integrating into related channels and so on. So it's a different type of ball game at that stage, and I think that brand is definitely a component that we're not paying as much attention to it in early stage as in later stage, but that should also go into the overall CAC calculation, which is sometimes a little fussy, if you will, knowing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Daniel. No, I was going to say, that's definitely a key consideration to make for startups. It kind of brings me to one of the questions I wanted to ask you in terms of, as you compared and contrasted working in two different settings. In terms of startups, they also would like to start looking at branding. They also would like to start looking at long-term customer value and loyalty and branding. So how can startups kind of strike that balance between short-term CAC reduction goals and their long-term customer value and loyalty goals? How do they play between them?
Yeah. So many different ways of kind of approaching it, but I think at the end of the day, trying to simplify my answer a little bit, it's all in the data. There's certain customers that we're acquiring, regardless of what type of business you are, that are going to contribute more or more than others. And the key, of course, to keep it really simple, is to acquire them at the lowest possible acquisition costs, and keep them happy for as long as possible, because they are going to generate the most revenue for you in the long term. And those are some of those programs that you mentioned, loyalty programs, retention type of programs that are going to be key. Because if we look at it from a LTV CAC ratio type of standpoint, if we can keep those customers a little bit longer, the equation is going to be very favorable for us in the long run. So it's not always about acquiring at the lowest possible price. It's finding that balance where you can acquire as low as possible, but maintain and keep the most valuable customers as long as possible. And if you can do that, you have your home run, and you're going to go to the next stage.
Excellent. Well, speaking of going to the next stage, Cathy, my next question is for you. There's a lot of times that startups look to go there, they try to make the right moves, but then they stumble and fall. What, according to you, are some warning signs or early indicators that a startup's CAC may be trending in the wrong direction?
Well, the first sign is that they don't know what their CAC is or aren't keeping close tabs on it. I think most businesses that pay attention to it and try to manage it often notice the early warning signs. There are lots of times when you can be caught off guard when the price of a channel increases really quickly because of factors outside of your control. So having, a close daily, weekly, monthly view on what's happening within your channels is really important. Other warning signs that it's going off track is kind of maybe on the other side where the lifetime value isn't keeping up with either your expectations or what it's been in the past. So increases in churn or decrease in repeat purchase behavior, depending on the type of business model that you have. So it's, I guess, not only keeping an eye on what your CAC is and how that's evolving over time, but also keeping an eye on the lifetime value picture and making sure that those stay in sync with each other so that you don't end up in a situation where it was fine a year ago and all of a sudden you're having a really wide divergence. Same thing with mentioned the timing of, or maybe Daniel mentioned the timing of your revenue can make a difference. So if you make product changes that affect whether customers pay you sooner or later, that can really put a big difference in how that CAC relates to the LTV. So I think it's a huge challenge for marketers and the companies around them to pay attention to the channels, pay attention to how the cost picture is evolving, figure out whether trends are short-term blips or long-term pricing changes in a channel, paying attention to what tracking is available as we go through an increasingly stringent world of privacy controls and cookie management and all of that. Certainly lots and lots of things to pay attention to, but it's really that boils down to, are you paying attention to your CAC? Are you paying attention to your lifetime value? Are you keeping them aligned and making adjustments when one or the other of them shifts?
Makes sense. Thank you. And I want to go to Atta with this. Atta, you're a marketing expert, and you've achieved a lot of success with SEO and other channels. I wanted to ask you specifically, if you would also, to add to Daniel's and Cathy's insights, any do's and don'ts from your perspective, and amongst the things that you've seen successful or have seen and learned from some things where the team had to stumble on something and then they had to quickly evolve and ensure that the trend or downward trend doesn't continue for too long. What are some strategies that you've implemented there? What are some do's and don'ts according to you?
Yeah, definitely a packed question. I really liked what Cathy mentioned about organizations that don't sometimes even know what their CAC is, right? Or don't have an accurate handle on what their CAC is. I think that's a big component to it. And there's a lot to pull from it, right? because you want to, at the most fundamental layer, it's your MarTech stack, right? It's how are you collecting the data, your marketing automation system, your CRM system, what is your universal source of truth, what is your attribution model to understand the data. I think a really important thing that startups can get right in the very beginning is data hygiene, is teaching their salespeople to be complete with their data input, to be accurate with their data input. Anytime you have a human inputting data to your systems, you want to have a protocol so that it's done accurately. That's the most important thing, because now you're going to aggregate that data and you're going to look at it and you're going to mine insights from it and you're going to make decisions based off of it. It has to be accurate. So your MarTech infrastructure, I would say, is very important. Then having kind of an individual who can aggregate that data, aggregate it the right way, and essentially pull out the metrics and KPIs that are important. That is kind of the next layer in the funnel that's very important for startups to have. And then the third layer of that funnel, third layer of this, kind of like the layers of the onion, is having that data-driven culture throughout your ranks, right? It's very important that every single individual contributor in your organization is empowered with data. And they're empowered in such a way that they are able to view the data that's important to them every single day. They're able to see what their carve out to the revenue targets are, what is owned by them, and how their campaigns, the scope of their work is contributing towards that end goal every single day. And it's funny because in my career, no 2 months are the same in terms of the strategy, in terms of really the nitty-gritty implementation of campaigns and the marketing. It seems like every single month there's some new update and all of a sudden everyone is scrambling and kind of adjusting their strategy. You can only do that when every single person has access to the data every single day. And it has to be accurate data. And they have to, basically, you have to incorporate it through your ranks. So, the things that have worked well for me, every single time it's the same. Every time I enter an organization, the first thing I do is I look at the MarTech stack and understand the data hygiene, the data input. Then I look at the data aggregation. I look at, kind of pulling it all together, making sense of the raw data. And then I look for the synergies. I look for the areas that actually have the strong CAC to LTV, and I double down in those areas. We put more resources in those areas. There's going to be some channels that are absolutely doing nothing, and they're just there bringing the ship down, and you want to get rid of those, but you want to be able to identify those, which is very difficult. And then there's some that you can kind of work, all right? You can improve upon them. You can make them better. So those would be kind of like the three step, key process. It's worked for me, and I think it would work for any startup as well.
Excellent. So Cathy, I'm going to come back to you. From your perspective, working with a growth equity firm, do you view CAC as you look at a certain startup and gauge its maturity and gauge the promise that it brings? How does CAC impact a startup's ability to secure funding or investment? And what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of paths on that. So in one sense, a CAC that is maybe sub-optimized is an opportunity to add value post-investment. So as long as the CAC isn't completely off the rails, maybe it's a little too high, maybe it's actually a little too low, and they could do more investment to grow faster. There are things that we can bring to the table, resources, people, assistants, that can help them get that CAC really tuned into where it should be as a business. So in one sense, having a CAC that's not perfect isn't always a red flag. Sometimes it's an opportunity signal. The other piece of the puzzle has to do with how profitable that company is or could be. So ultimately, we want to see companies end up in a profitable state where they can essentially keep running and not necessarily need to raise additional capital. So figuring out how big a gap that is and how much cash they're able to generate by operating the business with a CAC that's lower than the LTV is helpful to know. What is the runway, or where are they at in the cycle of investing to grow versus kind of collecting the benefits of that customer growth is an important piece of the puzzle. We tend to look towards profitable growth companies or where that's on the near horizon. And so clearly CAC is a big piece of the puzzle. You spend money on other things running a business, but how efficiently you get customers and how much more they can deliver in value to you compared to how much you pay to acquire them is a really big part of the picture. So I'd say, kind of both of those things. There's room for improvement can be attractive when we can see a tangible path ahead, but we also really do want to see that path to profitable growth.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Daniel, to close the loop, in terms of your advice for startups, if there were 3 things that startups could start doing immediately to notice a reduction in CAC, what would they be?
Yep. Increase conversion in the funnel. That's typically going to have the biggest effect. Then I would probably do, like Atta mentioned, look for opportunities to remove expensive channels or non-profitable channels, if you will, without necessarily sacrificing too much of your volume, because that's the other side of the coin. Basically, you want to maintain your volume as much as you can, and it might just be shifting budgets to more profitable channels, essentially. So that's the 2 components, and then the third component, which kind of goes back a little bit to what both Cathy and Atta just mentioned here. Know your data, like really leverage and be a data-driven team. There's so much opportunity and there's so much fat, if you will, to cut once you start digging into your data. And it could be an infrastructure challenge that you have as a very young company, where you have data siloed, front-end data, channel data that is not connected with the back-end data, and really work with your technology organization to make sure that they understand the importance of actually getting all the data into one place, so we can start making some really wise decisions on how we acquire customers and placing our KPIs. Really, really important from my standpoint. And then if I can give you a fourth one, hire a really strong analyst. It's a great investment, someone who can live and breathe the data. You as an operational leader will not always have the time to monitor everything, but an analyst that is living and breathing that and kind of become your right hand can really, really help you elevate the business.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you, Daniel, for encapsulating that. Cathy, on the flip side, I'd love to know, if there are 3 things that startups should stop doing immediately to notice a better control over CAC, what could they be?
Stop doing. Let's see. Well, let's see. I think there's a tendency to sometimes go around the data and to assume that, well, this channel is so new, or this channel is really different, or, well, this is a branding exercise and therefore it's not possible to measure its impact. I'd say, stop maybe making excuses for why not to think about the data, and
Absolutely.
instead think more creatively about how you might use the data to inform what you're trying to do. So it's true that it's difficult to measure the impact of branding exercises. However, at the end of the day, you are spending a certain amount of money on your marketing programs overall, and you're acquiring a certain number of customers. Therefore, it plays into the overall picture. Another thing I guess I see companies do is ignore parts of the cost. So it's very common to use just channel cost in the numerator and ignore things like your headcount and your tech stack and those sorts of costs. Honestly, because they're often harder to get to, the data lives in different systems like HR systems, and it lives in a different budget perhaps for your MarTech stack, but going and actually trying to make the effort to find those costs and at least on a bigger picture, monthly, quarterly basis, do the full calculation. And then I guess the final thing would be to think about maybe stopping only focusing on those very bottom of the funnel conversion points. So your most successful, like lowest cost acquisition channels, often your own branded keyword, right? But nobody could possibly have found you by typing in your company name or your product name if they hadn't heard about it from somewhere. And so, us as data people and optimizers want to say, look, here's this channel, just grow your branded keyword channel. Often not the right strategy for the long term. So it does really take both being data driven, but also being open-minded and creative about thinking about what the data is telling you and how to incorporate that broader picture.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cathy, for encapsulating that. I know it was a flipped out way to look at it, and it came as a curveball. But thank you so much. I thought it was important for startups to understand what not to do. And a lot of times we talk about things that we want to do, but it's super important for them to know what behaviors that they should not be embodying. So thank you for that. Atta, I want to hear from you. So we got the insight from Daniel, which is really more strategic in terms of what a startup should do, or the three things that a startup should do. I'd love to hear from you if there were three things that a startup could implement more from an execution perspective, something that could significantly improve their CAC. What would they be? And how many of those are related to data?
Yeah, automation, workflows, automation. Try to automate as much as possible. We live in this wonderful age of AI and the chat GPTs and all that good stuff. Have all your people using chat GPT. That would be the first and foremost thing. I would say also within your marketing automation systems, do have the system do the heavy lifting for you. Create your email series, create the automation, follow-ups and the triggers, is all the things that would otherwise be repetitive, mundane tasks for a human. You can have your marketing automation system, you can automate a lot of those things. So automation would be a big one for me. I would say the second thing is organic. You don't get more organic. Organic is a long-term play, but it pays dividends into the future. You want to always be thinking about your users when you're optimizing the online experience, and you will automatically be catering on the SEO front as well, right? Google is looking for user-friendly websites, but go that little extra step and make the website more crawlable, quicker page load speeds. Invest some dev resources into making your website SEO friendly, and then do the content marketing strategy as well, which is much easier now with ChatGPT and all these other systems. So this is something you invest in, kind of run it in the background all the time, and it'll start to pay dividends into the future. The third would be paid advertising. You definitely want to have, the ability to kind of, pull on a lever and be able to generate leads, be able to generate business, and just keep an eye on your spend, right? Don't, set your spend each month, pull it out from your revenue targets and what you currently see as now your CAC to CLV, and don't go over it, right? Have your set budget for paid advertising spend as well, and just be looking at the data. And one thing I really liked that Cathy mentioned here was that you don't want to at the same time be encumbering yourself and encumbering your team by looking at too much data, spending too much time, trying to make the data perfect, to collect the data, worrying about a multi-touch attribution model. It's okay. A swag is okay initially, and then you'll evolve and you'll get better. Just make sure that right now, you're doing the things that matter, and that short-term play is going to be some of your paid advertising. Long-term play is going to be organic, and then you're going to be nurturing everything with automation. So those would be kind of the three main areas that I would focus on. And then of course, always be thinking about how you can create a data-driven culture across your ranks, always making sure that, your individual contributors across the whole chain, are very well understanding of what the revenue target is, what they are doing is contributing to those revenue targets, and being able to track every single day, their individual contributions into those revenue targets, getting the data every single day. One last thing I'll mention is that if you're in the B2B space, you've got sales marketing teams, have a strong SLA and have joint goals for both the teams. And this way you've got both teams that have skin in the game. And then at the same time, you've got a strong SLA, and it keeps the teams working in lockstep. And then you can call them smarketing. We call them smarketing, sales and marketing teams together. But yeah, those would be the, I guess, 4 or 5 things now.
That was well said, Atta, and thank you for going over those in such vivid detail. I think it also ties into a couple of questions that came from our audience as well. The first one was, how can startups balance the need for data-driven decision making with limited resources and budget constraints? I don't know if you want to extend your answer to just include something that throws light on this as well.
Yeah. Okay. How is Yeah, that's a tough one. I will actually reiterate a little bit what Daniel had mentioned. Look to your competitors as well. You got to start somewhere. Start with the best practice. Start with that foundation. You're initially not going to have that much data, and you don't want to spend too many resources in collecting that data, understanding that data. It is a difficult thing. You can start with what your competitors are doing. You can use competitive intelligence tools like SEMrush, for example, and understand, for example, on the paid advertising front, where are your competitors spending their dollars? What search queries are they targeting? What kind of ad copies are they using? What kind of landing page experiences are they showing to their prospects? And you can just kind of see what they're doing, and then kind of not necessarily directly follow suit. Don't do that. But definitely, kind of use that as a guide into where you should start to invest your resources. I would say that's probably going to be your best kind of initial launch point. And then from there, you start to evolve. You start to make small changes, and you start to branch out. And as you continue to have a solid CAC to CLV, you can continue to branch out and take those risks and spend some of that money. And then to Cathy's point, you're going to see some fluctuations in that CAC to CLV, but you know that it's because you're in a testing phase. So you start with
Absolutely.
foundation, competitive analysis, and then you work your way out to your own thing, doing testing.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Atta. And I would also add, startups should remember that reducing CAC isn't a one size fits all endeavor. It's a dynamic process that requires adaptability and continuous learning. And your path, your startup's path to success may be unique, but the principles that we've discussed today can be applied to steer you in the right direction. The best practices, the top three things that you should do, that you shouldn't do. We talked about the KPIs. As you leave here today, I encourage you to reflect on the insights gained from the strategies shared. Take them back to your ventures, implement them, and be fearless in your pursuit of efficiency and excellence. Startups, remember, CAC isn't just an acronym for customer acquisition cost. It is your customer attraction currency. So spend it wisely, and your leadership and journey will be the talk of the entrepreneurial town. I'd like to thank you for being part of this insightful conversation today. I sincerely thank our panelists for their valuable insights and wish you all the best in your startup journeys. May your paths be marked by innovation, profitability, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. Good luck, and may your CAC always be in your favor. Good day, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.